Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. So glad you joined us today. Special guest on the program, Assemblywoman Monique Limon from the 37th District in California is with me. I think you're going to enjoy it. She's doing a lot of great work. And so Monique Limon, The Good Life is next. Welcome to Good Life. I'm Dean Wilson. I'm so glad you joined us today. As always, you can see all the interviews at goodlifetelevision.org. Love to have you join us there, and so glad you joined us today. I have a special guest today with me from the 37th District of the state of California, which is where we're sitting. Our state Assemblywoman, Monique Limon, is with me.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Dean.
Yeah,
good to be here with you.
Thanks for coming. You grew up in Santa Barbara, and Santa Barbara Junior High, Santa Barbara High School, went to Berkeley.
I did.
And then master's degree from Columbia University.
That's right. Yeah.
So that was your road, and then you came back.
And then I came back. I'm a local girl, so I came back to Santa Barbara, came back home, and worked for 14 years in higher ed at Santa Barbara City College, then UC Santa Barbara, and found myself getting involved in the community, serving on a few nonprofit boards, and that's probably what inspired me and created a little pathway to, I think, the role that I have now in politics, and as a state representative. But yes, I'm a local 805er.
So you weren't planning on this?
No, not at all, not at all. So I grew up really not knowing anyone in public office, and whether it was family or friends or acquaintances. And I describe myself sometimes as an accidental politician,
right,
because it wasn't a road or a pathway. I never did all these amazing internships that exist, right, in college or after college to pursue this pathway. I didn't major in political science. All of those little elements that we sometimes think lead people to a career in elected office or in policy work.
Right.
And but it was really through my work with students, with families, here locally with nonprofits in the community that got me thinking about all the other things that impact the people that I was working with. Not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, the environment, housing, jobs, and I started to dabble a little bit more with my interest and my time and involvement. And now, years, well over a decade later, I'm, in the assembly member for this area. Yeah.
Just practically, how often do you go to Sacramento?
So
you there every week?
Yes, January. Yes and no. So January through either end of August or mid-September, depending on whether it's an even or odd year, we are there every week, with a break in the summer. But we are there every week. My commute is usually go up on Mondays, come back on Thursdays. I've done the commute driving to Burbank mostly,
right,
and flying from Burbank up to Sacramento for a short period of time prior to COVID. I was able to do the direct flight from Santa Barbara, so I know what that means. To have a direct flight from Santa Barbara Airport to Sacramento is a big deal
right,
for the community. But mostly, yes. So, in the fall, we get to work from the district. We get to be here in the district without having to do the daily commute.
Yeah, that's great. What do you like? I mean, you've been in Santa Barbara a long time, and now you're representing. What do you like about this community? What stands out to you about this community?
So Santa Barbara is my community. In so many ways, I think of a community that's invested in my own success. I am the first in my family to go to college, daughter of immigrants. I grew up, going to after-school programs, Boys and Girls Club in town, knowing a lot of the nonprofits. And I think so much of who I am is these investments that have been made in, once upon a time, students like me, now leaders like me.
Right.
I think of the, organizations and nonprofits like the Scholarship Foundation of Santa Barbara that I was a recipient of while in college and also during my master's at Columbia. I think of all of these groups, but then the people that make up these groups, the board members, right, the staff members who are there to help. And I think that that's one of the unique things about representing a district you grew up in, representing a community that we have some big cities in the community, but we also have some really small communities in the city or in the county. And I think that that's part of the uniqueness. And it's also, it allows for someone like me who has family here in town, who grew up here, to have both connections, but still be learning a lot about other parts of the district that, you know, I wasn't as familiar with prior to being in office. The district represents nearly 500,000 people. So it's hard to know everyone, it's hard to know everything, but I think that one of the unique aspects of this community is that being from here and being able to connect with folks does help your understanding of how you interpret the policy.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That probably serves you well.
I think so. It depends on the vote. Some people will say yes, it served you well, and some people might say no, it didn't serve you well.
Probably.
But yeah, it does. It helps.
And you're not kind of the typical politician, as it were. Some people think that's a bad word. I don't. But just as part of your role, the district has a lot of people, a lot of requests. I want to pay you a little compliment because I was having lunch with somebody who I'd never known before the other day, and we were talking about you. I don't know how your name came up, but she said, "Yeah, Monique, you know, she's the real deal. She listens. She really wants. She helps." I think is what she said. But it must be challenging with you want to serve constituents well when there's 500,000 of them. You know, how do you stay engaged with the person in front of you? Does that make sense?
It does.
That must be a challenge.
So the issues, there's so many issues. And over the last 4 years, I also think that we learned, and we as a community have experienced more issues, some issues that we've never had. We never had a fire like Thomas Fire. We haven't had, I think in our lifetime, something like the debris flow. And I feel like, so one, it's an openness to understanding that it's not just my personal interest areas that I take with me and that I lead on. It's those of the community. I feel one of the big takeaways about being an elected official is you have to adapt to what the community needs from you, the type of leader that they need you to be, the type of issues you need to work on. And so I think part of having someone in front of you is listening and trying to do that. I mean, I can tell you that when you represent 500,000 people, we're not always effective at doing that, right? There's certainly challenges, and I think that especially when people don't feel like I do what they want me to do, they sometimes don't feel like I'm listening to them. But I think a lot of times is you're looking at the policy from a lens of, does it do more good than harm? Mm-hmm. Every policy, every bill I have voted on has had some trade-off. There's no doubt in my mind. I have yet to see the perfect bill. I have yet to see a bill that does everything that I think it should do, that's funded properly, that will help everybody. That's not the case. The bills and the laws that we vote for do not solve for every issue in that area. And I think it's recognizing that. It's accepting that sometimes we take pieces of a big issue to try to get to a place where we want to be, as opposed to taking the whole like loaf of bread, right? You take a slice of the bread and you welcome that piece of it. Right. So I think that's one of the recognitions, the understanding. And so when you have people that you talk to, you really do try to listen. I didn't go to Sacramento with the idea that I was going to know everything about everything and be able to solve every problem. Right. I went in believing that I was a liaison to this district, and certainly on the controversial issues, it's really hard when you have a lot of people who want you to do X, a lot of people who want you to do Y on the same issue. That's hard.
You can't please them all.
No.
Yeah.
No.
I want to talk about some of the work you're doing, because you're doing a lot of, I think, important work. But going back to kind of your pre-representative days when you were working, what are some of the nonprofits in town? You mentioned Santa Barbara Foundation, but what are some of the nonprofits in town that you've worked with or been a board member or believe in or whatever?
Yeah, so I was on the board of a New Beginnings Counseling Center for some time, which is a great counseling center here in town. They offer sliding scale, but they also were the first, among the first in the nation, to provide the safe RV parking program by using public and private lots.
So I've heard a little something about that.
Yes, and there's been some national attention.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was an interesting moment for me as a board member to see that that was a political moment. It just wasn't a group of board members supporting executive director and staff. It was, this idea of we have a homelessness problem here, and what are we going to do about it? Like, let's try to be creative and partner with some groups to at least solve a little tiny piece of the problem.
Right.
So you have, groups like that. I've been an advisory board member for the YMCA, youth channel, the YMCA Channel League, Islands youth programs.
Right.
And so I think that that's been something that, has been near and dear to my heart as well. And I'm a McCune Foundation board member as well, looking at, giving and philanthropy among many. And I think I went, I got this role as a state assembly member, but also did so keeping the nonprofits in mind. When I got to the legislature, I established the first select committee for the nonprofit sector because I had these experiences on boards and with nonprofits. I've never actually, I've not always worked for a nonprofit. I've served as a board member, supported nonprofits, many nonprofits, and I really thought it was important to uplift nonprofits. They are the fourth largest sector of employment in the state of California.
Is that right?
It is, yeah. And we never talk about nonprofits that way.
Yeah,
they bring in billions, billions.
Right.
And I think,
that's really interesting.
and I think that we change a little bit of the narrative of not just talk about them as, one little nonprofit here that provides services for this, services for that. But if we look at them as a whole, we understand how important they are into bringing, into investing in the economic, I think, section of our state. And that's so important. Really, nonprofits are more than just the one that we can think of, our favorite one or whatever it is, right? I think there's so much more there for our state. And so we've been able to do some good work in the Nonprofit Select Committee, and some good ideas have come out, including one that I'm very proud of. This year we launched California's version of grants.ca.gov. So one of the top questions I was always getting when I came back from Sacramento is, do you know where I can apply for funding? And it turns out that I didn't. And I was like, where can you apply for funding?
Right.
And sometimes I chuckle at the idea that I actually had to run a bill to create a website to do this, but I did. That's the way it worked. And so we created a bill and passed the bill, and it's now up and running. So grants.ca.gov.
Grants.ca.gov.
And it models what the federal government has done for many agencies, which it puts all of your department, the state's departments, grants opportunities for public, private, nonprofit up on a website. And now nonprofits have a way to search through them. I mean, simple things like that.
That's a great idea.
It's not going to be something that's going to make, the front page of a paper,
but that's huge.
But it's something that is useful.
It's really useful. I didn't even know about that. That's awesome. And you worked on that. I mean,
that was my bill.
Really?
That was my bill. I worked on it, and it came from the district. It came from people asking me the same question: where can I get funding from the state? And instead of going to every agency, because the state has lots of agencies, to look for individual funding, I said, this makes no sense. This is not, time efficient.
And I love that. I love that. I mean, that's awesome. Not just because I'm in nonprofit work, but problem solving. It's so wonderful to have elected officials who want to solve problems. I mean, because what we hear about on the news is fighting, pretty much, or bad news. But except on this program.
Good. I'm glad.
I love the problem solving part. Like, for example, we have a brain injured child, and navigating the state processes for that is enough to make you crazy.
Yeah.
And so practical, like, let's have a website where everybody can go to find out about grants. I mean, I love it. Genius.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you. I want to talk about some of the work you've done. You're on lots of committees, actually, but you did help me understand that the select committees are kind of more rare and not necessarily voting bodies, more discussion or groups or whatever. But I wrote down a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. One is, we're in a pandemic as we tape this, and you've done some work as the chair of the Assembly Banking and Finance Committee to protect consumers. Talk about that.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about serving in this role is that I went into the legislature with, higher ed, K through 12 experience. A lot of my supporters here were like, she's going to do so much work in education. And it turns out I've done some work in education, but there's different things that come up. And one of them was in December of 2017, I got appointed as the chair of the banking committee, only the second woman in history in either the Senate or the Assembly to get appointed to that. And so a lot of my policy focus has been, how do I help people in this particular space? I certainly didn't know in December of 2017 that 2020 we were going to start to experience some financial hardships in the state, in the country, in the world, and that these conversations about finances would be even more important. Some of the things that I've done, one, predatory lending has been an issue that I've really looked at. And I've spent some time in looking at these high cost loans in the triple digits. Loans that, perhaps you and I might not consider taking, but in a time of need, anyone would consider. The idea that usury is still out there. All of those things kind of came into my thinking of areas where I was like, there's still loopholes in the state, especially because I think sometimes we think California is so big and that we're the first at everything. Well, it turns out that putting a rate cap on some of these really high interest loans was not something that California did first. As a matter of fact, about 34 other states had already done it before us, red and blue states. And this was not a partisan issue. That's the thing. When you look at who's worked on issues related to high cost loans, I mean, you have red states, blue states, Dems, Republicans who are authoring this. And after, I think, a 2-decade fight in the legislature, I spent the last 2 years trying to get that bill out, a bill that does it, Assembly Bill 539, which is the Consumer Financial Protection Act. And we were successful, and it had bipartisan support, and true bipartisan support, and not just like they pressed a button. They spoke up in favor of saying we should do something because this impacts people in need. So we've done that. This year we created, after again a couple years of working on it, a consumer protection agency for the state of California. Really just to be a resource for individuals at the state level. So if they do have these questions, if they do have questions about how financial institutions work, or perhaps their terms or their loan, they have a place to call. I was often getting calls, and I was like, well, I'm not the consumer protection person. I'm the policy person. So we've done a lot of work in that space. And since COVID, we've also seen a 40% increase at the state in terms of the number of concerns that have come up around loans, whether it's a student loan, a personal loan, a home loan, lots of mortgages, and questions about that. And so it's been trying to figure out how to work with state agencies, how to work with the industry, how to work with consumers in trying to deliver a better product for Californians. It is clear to me that as we're watching what's happening in the economy, that we have people of all means, of all backgrounds, who have questions about financial services. And we're all impacted by financial services. We all are. There's money exchange in our world, whether it's paying a mortgage, whether it's using an ATM, whether it's running out of cash, or whatever it is. We are all exposed to this. So I think it's been my thought process on how I approach this committee has been about trying to help Californians of all backgrounds deal and work with financial institutions. And so we've had everyone at the table to try to identify some of the ways we can best do that.
That's awesome. Great. That's great. How did you get interested in Alzheimer's as a focus?
Alzheimer's is a very personal issue to me. I lost my grandmother March of 2019, after well over a decade of the slow progression of Alzheimer's, dementia, then identification of Alzheimer's. And as you know, I'm very close to my family. My mom comes from a family of 12, and my dad comes from a family of 11. So most of my family that's here in the United States is actually here in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. And so I'm very close. I'm the eldest granddaughter on my mother's side. And when my grandma got diagnosed, she needed 24-hour care. And there came a point where she needed 24-hour care. And we had a schedule in the family of who would spend the night with her. And as the eldest, I was the closest to her, and I was, the only grandchild that actually was part of the schedule for a period of time. And so I would spend the night with my grandma. Like, I knew my days, I knew the medicines she had to take. And again, my grandma and I were very close. And so I really watched a family who loved and who cared so much for, our matriarch. And but also watched how hard it is. Caring for another person is very, very difficult. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, like, it's only my brother and I. What happens, like, with us if one of our parents gets sick and needs this level of care? And Alzheimer's is something that's very near and dear to me. It will always be, but it's also something that I think requires policy in terms of helping support research for it, and also understanding that as we see an increase in people who are aging, people who are identified with either dementia or Alzheimer's, we as a state are going to have to do more to try to help families deal with the amount of care. Not only is it costly, but there's a human resource that's needed to care, and that's really difficult to come by. So that's where my passion comes from. It's very personal, and I've been, it's been great to work here in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties with the Alzheimer's Association. We do our annual walks, and I've been a big champion in trying to support at the state level more funding for research, for early prevention, for working with our county aging communities to do more. To make sure people have the resources.
Yeah, and I would think with the baby boomers where they are, and in terms of the demographics right now, that's probably becoming a bigger problem.
It is becoming a bigger problem in the state, and we're seeing the numbers and the projections over the next decade of more people who potentially will have dementia or Alzheimer's. And so what do we do? How do we care for our community? And I come from a community and I think a family who really looks at elders as very special. Like, you give all you have because they gave for us, right? And so we care, and we try to figure out how we do that. But I have to recognize that the solution for this is going to be more than just relying on that one family member or that one family to do it for their own. This is a bigger problem. There's system issues.
Let's talk about the environmental protection legislation you've worked on, and kind of, obviously you're in a beautiful district.
I am.
But talk about that kind of, and how that has become important to you.
Absolutely. Being from the district, and I think you grow up and you understand that this is what our district looks like, and what's in place is not the case all over the county, or all over the state, or all over the world, right? Like, I mean, you have issues where you see communities that look very different like ours. I think that this community, the Central Coast, has been very big about trying to protect our environment, to ensure we have, water quality, air quality that makes sense, and I think that's good for people. And so for me, the environmental protections and the issues that I work on really come from that lens. They come from the lens of wanting to ensure that not just today, but that the future has an environment that's sustainable. It is complicated, though. I will tell you that. It's not just this, like, do this or do that. I think it's really about thinking how we get there. What I have found in the legislature, working with colleagues across the aisle, is that we all have the same goal. You won't find a legislator who doesn't want clean air or clean water. I've not met one. But how we approach it is very different. How we work to the goal, the way that we create a policy that gets us to the goal is very different. And sometimes it could be difficult. But I'm proud of the work that I've done in the legislature. I think people have this idea of California, being maybe like modeling the federal government, where there's a lot of partisanship. But in the legislature, I would say that at least 80% of the bills that get out are bipartisan. And no one ever talks about those because we agree on those. It's the other, percentage, the smaller percentage that we don't. And I know of the bills that I have had signed by the governor that I've worked on, 95% of them have been bipartisan, where we've had that support. And so I tell people, like, let's not get caught up on the labels, but let's also look at, there's clearly an idea there that resonates with people who think differently.
Right.
I also think that, in California, the Democratic tent's really big. Very big.
Right.
Very big.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a lot of shades and layers there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's good. I mean, and that's refreshing to hear. Last question is going back to your roots, education. And I was reading kind of about your history in that regard in terms of, I guess maybe kind of you got your start in one sense focusing on education, and I'm assuming that's still high on your list.
It is. Education is, as a profession, as those are my roots.
Yeah.
It was working with students and families that introduced me to the idea of other policy areas that matter for students and families. I couldn't just care about what happened within a classroom wall or within classroom walls without caring everything that came in. You realize that students and parents care about housing, they care about the environment, they care about jobs, they care about health care. All of these things impact the classroom experience. And I do miss working with students. I think, I did it for so many years, and I miss working with students. I miss the energy of working on a college campus. There's just something about a special energy. But I also feel like I take them with me. And they're part of my thought process. They're part of the future that I'm trying to, work for. I won't be in public office forever.
Right.
That doesn't happen. There's always an end date to what we do, right? And so the hope is that someone else can take over, right? And bring new, fresh policy ideas to the community. But, when I think of who that would be, I think of students. I think of the future. That's who's going to take over.
Yeah.
And so that's a very special place. And certainly I've gotten to do some work in education. Not all of it, because again, I think that when you're a leader, you have to be responsive to the needs of the community. But it's still near and dear to my heart, and I follow the local school races probably more than other people do, because it's still an interest to me.
Right. Well, it's really important. Thank you for everything you've done for the community and for serving. It's great to meet you. It's refreshing and great to meet you.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks for having me. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. We'll see you next time.